Good evening and welcome to a specially extended Newsnight Scotland. It's an historic day. The Prime Minister came to visit. The Edinburgh Agreement, as we're told we should call it, was signed, and the starting gun on the referendum campaign was fired, and half the UK's media descended on the capital. In a moment I'll be trying to work out what's significant in the agreement with pro-independence and pro-union politicians. But first, today was so historic they actually let me out of the office. The two signatories warmed up by spending the morning sending out messages. They were so obvious they don't really deserve to be called subliminal. David Cameron was at the new aircraft carrier in Rosyth. British, commissioned by the Union, the sort of thing you won't be building in an independent Scotland. Alex Salmond was at a nursery. Scottish social services, free provision for as many as possible. The sort of thing the Tories and Labour will rip to shreds if you don't vote yes to independence. Back in Edinburgh, there was a growing sense of anticipation. Well, maybe not. Her Majesty's finest spent the morning training to link arms in double cordons. They'd been warned there could be crowds and even trouble. It proved about as accurate as the Met Office forecast of the storm 25 years ago. In Catalonia, demands for independence have become a mass movement in the streets.
More than 1 million persons on the street. That's a lot. Is a huge demonstration. One of the biggest demonstrations in our history. Exactly. Just have a guy here. So we are really interested in Catalonia because is this point. I mean, we are not allowed to talk. We are not allowed to hold a referendum. So we are very angry because at least we would like to do this referendum, to do the consultation to the people, but we are not allowed.
We want to know how seriously both leaders think of the issues, and I want to know how seriously the Scottish people think of the independence and the future development of the regions.
And then there was a flurry. Well, here we are then, the moment many of the most fervent Scottish nationalists thought they would never see. A British Prime Minister arriving to sign a deal on a referendum on independence. The most historic day since 1707, one historian called it this morning. Well, you can make your own mind up about that. It's not raining though. Inside there was an hour of polite chit-chat, then the momentous historic piece of paper was signed. It was done in silence, but feel free to imagine trumpet blasts, handles, fireworks music, or anything less flattering that takes your fancy. Afterwards, David Cameron declared himself satisfied.
You cannot hold a country in the United Kingdom against the will of its people. Now, Scotland voted for a party that wanted to hold a referendum. I believe in showing respect, and this is the right outcome for Scotland and for the United Kingdom to give the people the choice. But I passionately hope and believe that they will vote to keep the United Kingdom together. We are better off together, we're stronger together, we're safer together.
And that was him, off back to London. Alex Salmond's special advisers had warned him he should under no circumstances look smug. It was an effort.
And I believe we'll win it by setting out a positive vision for a better future for our country, both economically and crucially also socially. And it's that vision of a prosperous and compassionate society, a confident society moving forward in Scotland, which will carry the day.
Most people want more devolution rather than independence. What would you say today to all the organisations and individuals who submitted evidence to your consultation on the referendum, calling for an option of more devolution, and who are now saying this is just a politician's fix? You've just done a deal to have a referendum on independence, ignored your own consultation, you haven't even published it.
It's quite true that we did not achieve the objective of allowing the Scottish Parliament to have provision, including the question as to whether there should be one or two questions. That was very much the view of the Westminster government. But in the terms of any negotiation, there has to be an element of compromise on both sides. And the very substantial gain that Scotland now has is that we have an agreed process to hold this referendum and respect for the outcome of the referendum. I think that is an agreement worth having. I think that's a huge and substantial advance forward. But of course, I can well understand why people may have wished to see a second question in the ballot paper, but that was an argument which was not foreclosed on by the Scottish Government. That was an argument which was foreclosed on by the Westminster Government. My job as First Minister of Scotland was to see an agreement by which the process could be agreed so as the outcome could be respected. That is a substantial and huge gain.
Outside, I thought I'd ask the Yes to Independence campaign why this great event had attracted a crowd of almost nobody.
Well, I think there's a lot of security involved in
No, there
this.
isn't. You can walk up there if you want.
Well, there's a lot of security involved when the Prime Minister comes to town, but the debates are going on in the communities.
No, but hang on, there's not. If anyone was interested, they can walk to that barrier just a few feet away from us. There's 4 people there.
Well, I think the whole thing about this campaign is it's not that people come to the politicians, it's people actually going out and speaking in their communities and having conversations. So the debate's not going to be
surely
had.
you would like it if people were actually a little bit interested, you know,
Well,
even a couple of hundred of them.
I think they are very interested in it, and what's been happening, which is very interesting since the SNP came into its second term of government, is there's been so many more questions on the doorsteps with here going around. People having genuine questions about the process and how they can take part in it and how it will affect them and their communities. So these conversations are happening. They might not be happening in a car park outside St Andrew's House, but they're happening across Scotland
it's not
and
a car
have been
park,
since
it's a
the
road.
SNP.
I mean, to be fair, there were 5 people up there, but they went away.
This debate is not going to be won outside St Andrew's House. I don't think we should expect people to come and see us and the media standing outside St Andrew's House. It's going to be had, and is already happening, in community halls, in mother and toddlers groups and at the school gates across Scotland. That's where the debate's happening about Scotland's future, and I don't think politicians or the media should necessarily expect the public to come to them.
I should say those who counted assure me the crowd did fleetingly reach 13 before falling away again.
Maybe this has been history in the making, but you know, today's been slightly peculiar. There's a huge media circus here. There are enough satellite trucks to do justice to a small war. But it's all to cover an event we've all known was going to happen for weeks, which duly did happen, and where those involved said exactly what you'd expect them to say. Then anyway, we are dealing with politicians. Sun's still shining though. I'm joined in the studio by the Conservative leader Ruth Davidson, Labour's Jackie Baillie, the local government minister Derek Mackay, and the leader of the Scottish Greens Patrick Harvie. I also have with me Professor John Curtis of Strathclyde University to inject some sense into the proceedings. Derek Mackay, I was very struck by the fact that Alex Salmond made great play of the last paragraph of this agreement, which says the British and Scottish governments will work together no matter what the outcome of the referendum is. Why is Alex Salmond so exercised about this? I mean, after all, to my knowledge, no one in the British government ever suggested they wouldn't respect the outcome of a referendum.
Well, I think there's been a great deal of speculation that the British government would make it as difficult as possible to both attain the referendum and then have a decent debate around this. What we have, what this is secure...
Sorry, that's a different issue. What
well,
Alex Salmond is
actually, I was about
what
to,
the
I was
Section
about to
30 bit
compliment.
says is that no matter what the outcome of the referendum is, it will be respected by both the British and the Scottish government.
That's right.
But no one ever... Was there ever any suggestion or suspicion on your part that somehow or other you could have a referendum and the British government would try to sabotage the result?
Well, it wasn't so long ago there were voices saying that the referendum should be controlled by Westminster, that the Scottish Parliament couldn't set the question or the timing or indeed the franchise. So this is a historic mandate achieved today. But that clause 30 is exactly what I've outlined as well. I think it is significant to say that not only will the UK government respect the referendum and Scotland's right to hold that referendum, they'll respect the result and work constructively on whatever that outcome is. That is actually a significant statement that has never been said before.
Ruth Davidson, why did the Conservative Prime Minister allow Alex Salmond to turn this into a sort of state occasion as if they were signing the Treaty of Versailles?
Well,
I'd imagine that Alex Salmond would like to think that he's in Versailles Palace. But I think if we pick up on what Derek said,
hang on,
the converse...
why did he go along with that?
I will absolutely answer your question in a second, but the converse of that is also that the Scottish Government has to abide by the result of this referendum and not cry foul and not say that a big boy did it and ran away, or that we were told that we couldn't have this or we couldn't have that in this agreement. Alex Salmond signed this on camera so that he can't say 2 years hence, if he loses, I believe when he loses.
All right, how about having a bash at answering the question I actually asked you?
Okay, sorry.
Which is, why did a Conservative Prime Minister go along with turning this into some sort of grand state occasion?
Because this was the passing of the baton from the UK government to the Scottish Government, who won a mandate to hold a referendum on independence, just on independence. And that has happened today, and it was marked by the signing of an agreement to that effect. We'll now see Section 30s go through the two parliaments, and we'll see that power pass to the Scottish Parliament.
Jackie, what's your take on that? Because if one were to imagine the utterly implausible, but let's just say, for the sake of the argument, Alex Salmond's whole thing about a second question was just a ploy to use in negotiations, then it's worked perfectly, hasn't it? He's got everything he wants.
It was an extraordinary ploy, though, if that's what it was, because, you know, he marched so many people in Civic Scotland up to the top of the hill, and he's just abandoned them there. It was clear from the start that he wanted a second question. He's not confident of winning a vote for independence, and that's why he wanted to muddy the water. Now, I am very pleased that what we have is clarity. We have a single question. We can unite about the result, whatever that result may be, and I think we've made progress today in moving on and moving forward, so that people actually move away from a discussion about the process onto the substance, because that's what people want to do.
But Patrick Harvey, I'm interested in your view on, do you find it normal or extraordinary that, having made such a fuss about this consultation they were having on the referendum, the Scottish Government has just done a deal with the government in London, and we still don't know what's in their consultation that was supposedly going to govern their behaviour?
I certainly think it would have been better if those consultation responses and the analysis of them had been published before we got to this stage. But frankly, while I'm disappointed, I'm not hugely surprised
but you could understand some of these Civic Scotland people who now seem to feel they've been played for suckers.
Oh yes, absolutely. But you know, let's remember the opportunity to have a really genuine, open, participatory process with Civic Scotland in the driving seat, not just the political parties, was missed. That was years ago, when the UK political parties set up the Calman process and the Scottish Government had its national conversation, and they clearly both had built in their own preferred outcome into their processes. It began as a political stitch-up, and this deal is a political stitch-up. I'm disappointed that it's not a more open process we're looking at, but I'm not surprised. However, here's where we've got to, and we're about to have a referendum which all parties now will have to accept the outcome of.
As a matter of interest, did your consultation reject a second question?
The analysis of the consultation is still ongoing. There was over 26,000 responses to the consultation, and that analysis will be released shortly. That analysis, that consultation then informs the...
At least on the gay marriage one, you at least waited till it was published before ignoring it. Well, you've got something on record. You've ignored this one. It's not even been published yet.
Well, the consultation on equal marriage was a consultation, not a referendum. What this consultation on Scotland's question is about asking the opinions on the referendum. That will then inform the bill, which will make its way through the Scottish Parliament.
So when Alex Salmond went around saying, oh, I might want to have a second question, I'll wait and see what's in my consultation, this is very, very important because I'm such a Democrat. Well, we should all along have said, what a lot of hooeys, just using it as a ploy.
Well, not at all. Throughout the consultation, the SNP government made it perfectly clear that we were open to a second question, we were open to Devil Max, further powers being granted to Scotland if people didn't choose independence. But it's no surprise that independence for Scotland is our first preference. It's not the SNP government that said no to Devil Max. It's the UK government that said no to Devil Max.
So, and what we have achieved... Hang on, just to be clear, on the day that your government has signed an agreement with the British government, you can't tell me what your own consultation says on it.
I've already told you I don't have sight of the analysis of the consultation because that's still underway. But what we have achieved is the mandate to put the question to the people of Scotland on independence, and that was our objective.
So that, now, Luke, 16 and 17-year-olds voting, can you, in a way that doesn't leave us all completely bamboozled, explain why it is that if the Scottish Government has control over the register of 16 and 17-year-olds who can vote as opposed to Westminster, that means, I think, that more 16 and 17-year-olds can vote?
Well, the truth is the agreement that's been signed today does not make clear how the enfranchisement of all 16 and 17-year-olds will be achieved. Essentially, the UK government has essentially said to the Scottish government, well, okay, that's fine, you can enfranchise them if you want to, but there's nothing in the agreement that makes that possible. And the truth is, at the moment, given existing standard electoral registration law, it would be impossible to get on the normal electoral register any person whose 18th birthday would be later than the 1st of December 2015, and that therefore anybody less than 16 3/4 would, through the normal registration process, not get on the register. We await to see, presumably when the referendum bill is published in February, what the Scottish Government intends to do about this, but the implication seems to be that what they're going to have to do if they want all 16-year-olds to be enfranchised is to introduce a separate registration process. And then we get into some of the nasty nitty-gritty, such as the fact that actually the UK government has already decided to delay the compilation of the 2014 register until early that year for other reasons to do with changing the registration process. So shall we say there's certainly going to be a certain amount of pressure on assessors, who are the local government officials responsible for compiling the register already in 2014, and being asked to engage in a separate, different registration process will certainly not be greeted with bureaucratic joy in many local government offices in Scotland.
I hope you all got that.
To that.
God, if I can say, that's very helpful. But where there's a will, there's a way, and there is a willingness to give 16
I don't want to linger on this too long,
so we will find a way through this.
Both Patrick and I were in a meeting earlier this year with the First Minister Alex Salmond, Joanne Lamont, Willie Rennie. Margot was also invited but wasn't able to attend, where Bruce Crawford and the First Minister brought out not just the Electoral Commission but also civil servant government officials to tell us that they knew full well that people under the age of 16 and 10 months would not be able to vote in this referendum, that there would be huge problems with doing this. So this is something that's been on the Scottish Government's radar for some time.
I think they recognised there would be problems. I don't think they accepted that it couldn't happen. Look, I think
let's not
the principle's been agreed.
They've been promising all 16 and 17-year-olds to vote.
On the principle, I mean, now that's a done deal, Jackie Bailey, you would accept it's perfectly reasonable to give 16 and 17-year-olds the vote?
Absolutely, I would accept
and you would
the principle
too,
of
would
that.
you?
No, we'll be voting against it when it's brought to the Scottish Parliament, because we believe, in the same way as the Electoral Commission put forward in 2004 when they looked at this, that the franchise...
So why have you changed your mind then?
No, we haven't. We just want consistency across the board. You know, it's one thing to pick 16 and 17-year-olds simply for the referendum, to enfranchise them just for that purpose. But, you know, it's much more complex, as we've already heard, you know, to actually deliver. And there are serious child protection issues. You cannot publish the name and address and date of birth of somebody under the age of 16, which would be a requirement for the electoral register. We need to find a different way of doing things.
And presumably you're happy with the 16 and 17-year-olds vote?
Yes, very much so. And the fact that there are some technical challenges to overcome is not a reason to refuse to try. And I think we need to accept that there'll be some detailed questions to answer, but let's give the government time to come up with those answers.
All right, let's move on. John Curtis, I'm curious, in your analysis, if I were to ask you, on each side of the argument, what you think the weak spots are, the stuff that they really need to convince people to get anywhere, what would you say each side's weak spots are?
Okay, I think as far as the yes side is concerned, I think their misfortune is that this referendum is happening after the Eurozone crisis. And the SNP's perspective for some time has been that independent Scotland would remain in a monetary union with the rest of the United Kingdom. And we now have learnt that one of the lessons of the Eurozone crisis is that it's difficult, indeed virtually very impossible, to maintain a monetary union in the absence of a degree of fiscal coordination between the member states. Yet the SNP are still telling us that we would an independent Scotland would have fiscal autonomy. So I think the whole question of monetary union is an issue on which the yes campaign still have work to do. For the no side, I think undoubtedly the risk they have taken through the UK government in not allowing the second question to be on the ballot paper is that 1/3 or so of people in Scotland whose first preference is for a more powerful Scottish Parliament within the framework of the Union may now be wondering, well, what happens if we vote no? Will that mean that the Unionist parties will feel that they're off the hook and nothing will happen, and therefore I have to vote yes? Or will actually by autumn 2014 there be some relatively agreed plan between the Conservatives, Labour and Liberal Democrats about the way forward? And at the moment at least it's not entirely clear that we will actually reach that position, and therefore maybe that will give the opportunity to the yes side to get rather more votes than they might otherwise would have done.
All right, well, look, Ruth Davidson first. How do you deal with that? I mean, it is slightly surreal that we are sitting here and we've just agreed to have a referendum on something that the polls show people don't want, and we've just agreed to not have a referendum on something that the opinion polls show people do want.
Well, I think, first of all, we've got to talk about what is the status quo, what are more powers that are coming, and I think we've got to make clear to the people of Scotland that the powers that the Scottish Parliament have now are not the powers that they're going to have in the future. There's a whole slew of new powers coming. Some of them won't even be in place until 2016,
but are you in
2
favour
years
of more powers
after the
beyond
vote.
the ones that have already been passed by
I think
Parliament?
what I've already said is that I believe in the Scotland Act. I believe in huge tranche of powers that are coming this way, including, for example, a Scottish rate of income tax. But also what's intriguing about the Scotland Act is that it's an enabling act. It allows further powers to be devolved within itself without new bills going through the UK Parliament in order to do it.
So your pitch is going to be what? It's going to be, look, you don't need to vote for independence if you want more devolution, because what? Because the Conservatives are going to promise more devolution
first of all,
beyond the Scotland Act. Is that
first
what
of
you're
all,
saying?
the Conservatives have already delivered the Scotland Act, which is more devolution. It's the biggest tranche of certainly fiscal, financial powers that have come to the Scottish Parliament in more than 300 years. But I think what you'll see, not just in our party, but across all three of the parties, and work is ongoing at the moment, that normal politics will resume, and that areas of, for example, the Constitution will be things that will be included in manifestos on which the public will be asked to vote, one member, one vote, in future elections.
All right.
And that's things that have always happened before.
Derek Mackay, again, what John said about UCamp, I mean, on the monetary stuff, the SNP are all over the place. I mean, I think, Alex, there was this view that we'll have a monetary union, the Bank of England will be lender of last resort and all the rest of it, which Alex Salmons appeared to decide about 2 weeks ago wasn't the case at all. I mean, you can't seem to make up your own minds what this amounts to, never mind convince anybody else.
No, that's not the case at all. I think what most households and what most families will be discussing won't necessarily be the Eurozone and Scotland's place in it. It'll be, what does independence mean for individuals, what does it mean for families, and what does it mean for communities?
Oh, look, hang on a second, that is immensely patronising to people in Scotland to say that, oh, you don't worry your little heads about things like monetary union when the Eurozone is in crisis.
No, I'm saying actually,
you just worry about the pound in your pocket.
No, I'm actually saying that people care about their communities, their families, and their own individual circumstances, and they will think about what independence means for them as well as the country. And you know, when we posed the question, if independence would make your family and your individual circumstances better off, actually a majority are more in favour of independence than against it. So actually the circumstances for individual households and individuals, it does matter.
You haven't said a word about the question I asked you, which was about
monetary
policy.
I'm quite happy to say that right now Scotland has no levers of control over our fiscal powers, and
right,
even after well, you don't want an answer to the question you've just asked me. Even after the transfer of powers from the Scotland Act, we'll still be very limited in the powers that we have. With independence, we would have fiscal autonomy, but within a monetary union, and the people of Scotland, if they want to stay within sterling, they will, and if ever the circumstances are right to join the euro, then that'll be a matter for the people of Scotland. Right now, we don't have the ability to make that choice as part of the union.
Right. How do you counter? A lot of people will say, look, if I can't have more devolution, I might as well vote for independence. Why not?
I think it was important to have clarity over whether Scotland wanted independence or not, and it's absolutely important we have that as a single question in the referendum.
What people are going to say to you, but we've been sold a pig in a poke here, because we know perfectly well if we vote against independence, nothing will happen.
Well, that's where I fundamentally disagree with you. Labour was the party of devolution that delivered the Scottish Parliament. You know, I strongly believe, as my party does, that this is an evolving process, and we've set up a devolution commission to specifically consider what additional powers would be required in order to do particular things in Scotland. And we've extended that devolution commission not just to look at powers devolved from Westminster to the Scottish Parliament, but indeed from the Scottish Parliament to local government as well.
Jackie, are you going to be willing, are you going to be willing to promise the people of Scotland that eventually these proposals that you come up with, are you going to be willing the people of Scotland the right to have a vote on them in exactly the same way as the SNP have promised the people of Scotland the right to vote on independence. I mean, we may not have the devolution max referendum in 2014, but is the Labour Party going to be willing to allow the people of Scotland eventually to choose on this issue if it decides to remain within the Union?
I think we will have general elections, we will have Scottish Parliament elections, there will be an opportunity for people to express their choice about what further devolution they would want to see in Scotland.
But you're telling me not necessarily for a referendum?
Well, I don't think it's necessary. I think there are other opportunities to do so. What I think is important is that we start to set out quite clearly what we believe well in advance of a referendum on independence.
Right. Where do you fit in on this? Because presumably you have a vision of independent Scotland. I mean, you wouldn't consider yourself to be a nationalist, would you?
No, I don't. And my
so
party's not.
Where does your voice get a hearing here?
Well, I'm here tonight. You've kindly invited us on to express a view, and I will express a different view than Derek about currency, for example. I don't think that we should be satisfied with the idea that an assertion about a currency union with the rest of the UK is a long-term option. It may be a transitional phase perhaps into something else, but I don't think it's a long-term option. But I think both sides, yes and no, have a difficulty with diversity. Both sides need to find a way to turn diversity into a strength instead of a weakness. What you won't hear from me is attacks on the Better Together campaign on the basis that there are different parties in it. I think diversity is a good thing in politics, and both sides, I think, need to argue the question on the matters of substance, not just sling mud at each other by saying that they're divided.
Look, just let's end on a business about polls, your speciality. Obviously, the people in favour of independence hope they can turn them round. Mm-hmm. Is this like elections where polls... I mean, because the polls have been saying much the same about independence for 20 years, haven't they? Can you turn them round fast as you can in an election? Or is this in some sense categorically different?
You certainly can sometimes in some referendums. If you hold a referendum on the alternative vote, a subject about which nobody knew anything very much at all before May 2011 and frankly cared very little, it proved very easy to turn public opinion around. I think the interesting question about this referendum is that because this has been a subject of debate for 40 years, a subject about which at least certainly a non-trivial proportion of the Scottish public already have very firm views, how much room for movement there will be. It's only because I think in truth there is that 1/3 of people in the middle who want more powers but don't necessarily want independence that opens up the prospect for movement. But there is no doubt many people are already of a settled view on this subject.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Well, of course, it won't be left there. It'll go on for another 2 years, right? Quick look at tomorrow's front pages, starting with the Scotsman. Do we have it there? There we are. There's a picture of Alex Salmond and David Cameron, rather, on the front page. An historic day, it says. The Guardian has a rather artistic version of Alex Salmond. I think that's taken at the press conference he was at on its front page. And the Eye, there it is. Referendum deal sparks battle for the Union, it says. And that's all we've time for tonight. Good morning, Scotland. We'll be speaking to the leader of the Better Together campaign, Alistair Darling, and Blair Jenkins of Yes Scotland tomorrow. Good night.